Welcome to Megan's Bookish Life, a podcast where literary meets lifestyle. Each episode is tailored to the guest with questions they've never been asked and funny moments that make us laugh. I'm your host, Megan, and thank you for coming along this journey with me. Today on Megan's Bookish Life podcast, I am joined by the author of one of my top books of 2024, Killing the Bordens, Lizzie Borden and the Unsolved 1892 Borden Murders, C.Cree. C, thank you for coming on Megan's Bookish Life. I am ecstatic that you're here.
Oh, thank you, Megan. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really excited for our talk today.
I have to tell everyone, because you were a part of this, but I was so semi-unprofessional emailing you because I feel like when I contacted you, I just dumped a whole email of me saying, I love your book and I'm a huge fan. Please come on the podcast. So sorry for being so blunt about that.
No, it was fantastic. You were very enthusiastic. And I appreciate it because I'm as enthusiastic about the Borden story as you seem to in your emails.
That's why I'm like, if you said no, I would be okay with that too, because I'm ecstatic that you even responded. So I read Killing the Bordens in November of last year because I needed, weird thing, I needed a palate cleanser from some romance books because I felt like what I was reading was repetitive and I was like, I want something different. And I saw it on Killing the Bordens on KU, click download. And then immediately fell in love with the factual writing that you kind of did. And we'll get into that. It's like factual, but nonfiction, but fiction, all that kind of thing. And it became a nightly bonding session between me and my mom so my mom has an eye focusing problem. So she can't read all the time, but I was telling her how the chapters were going at each night after I read them. And so it was like our own little book club, but she wasn't reading it. I was reading it for her. So we became, I don't know, within 2 months, we were like, we love Lizzie Borden. Who did it? Who did this? We don't love Lizzie Borden. We love the book. Like, who did this? And then our minds were changed and all that stuff. And it was like, there's no better feeling of getting so invested in a book, especially when it's a real story.
Yeah, that was the most fun part of writing the book. And that's why I wrote the book, basically, because I wanted to read the Borden story like a mystery. Read it as a mystery novel where the real facts in the book are the real facts in the story, and the real clues that you're reading in the book are the clues in the story. So if you're solving it, reading the mystery, you are solving the real Borden mystery.
I felt like when you've seen the Borden case in certain books before, it's kind of like transcripts. You're reading someone's lawyer paper from their class or whatever. It's not in the writing style that you do, which I think probably takes a ton of time, and we'll get into that too. But for your first, is this officially your first fictional book, or is this like you're still kind of nonfiction? What is genre is this book?
Yeah, and that's a tricky one because when you sell it online, you have to list it in the genres, and I'll let you pick 3 on Amazon. And I thought, great, what am I going to do? Biography, true crime, biographies of women, fiction, mystery. What is this? Murder mystery. Biographies of murder and mayhem is one of the categories on Amazon.
I've seen those, yeah.
So yeah, and so I didn't know where to put it. So I would call it mostly nonfiction, but I want to be fair with people and help them understand there is some fiction in the story in order to complete the full story that you need to tell it like a novel. Because there's the solution to the murders is in here, right? And it's an unsolved mystery, but I am going to give you a solution for the murders, yeah.
I was like, it's an unsolved mystery, but then in the end, I feel kind of satisfied. Okay, I shouldn't say satisfied. That's a terrible thing to say about a murder. I feel like you wrote it in a way where I'm like, oh my gosh, I never thought of this.
Oh, well, thanks. And when I was writing the book and I had a bunch of people reading it, and then they would read the whole book, and I learned to not ask them, did you like the ending or did you like this solution? Because it's a book about axe murders. I mean, do you like the axe murderers? Did you like the axe murders?
Exactly. What part did you love? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but does it make sense? Does it work? I think you used the word satisfying, but does it fit the facts? Because I did my best to put all the facts that we have and the clues, and then give you the solution that fits all those facts.
I'm going to do the whole cliche thing, and you're going to be like, oh, Megan, you did it. Why Lizzie Borden?
Why Lizzie Borden? Yeah, so I was not planning to write a book about Lizzie Borden. I didn't sit down and say, this is an interesting story. I'll do years of research and then write a book about it. I actually I had heard of Lizzie Borden when I was a kid, and I thought it was all made up. That was this urban legend, and then I found a book about it, and I read the book and I thought, wow, this is a real story. These are real people. And then I just started reading about it more and more. And like so many people with the Borden story, I went down the rabbit hole. And then pretty soon I've got a dozen books. And now I've read the transcripts multiple times. And I've read all these analyses of the trial and women's issues at the time and how gender bias affected the trial and all these books. And partway through the process, I thought, this is a tremendous amount of work. This is thousands and thousands of pages of research. And I love it. It was so fascinating. But then I also thought, someone should write this as a book that you could just read, a reasonable length mystery that they did all this research so that you can say, oh, and that's true. And that's true. And that's everything is true as much as possible. But then they should write it as a book. And even when I thought that, I didn't think I should do it. But then later I thought, well, why don't you? Right? I mean, you're the one who wants to read this book. Why don't you write it and see if you can write it? So I did.
You have a background in other nonfiction books, correct? Per your website?
I am a nonfiction writer for a living. I'm a professional nonfiction writer.
Okay, so I also, everyone who listens to my podcast know that I'm a journalist in school again. I went back to school. So I love a good nonfiction writing. My favorite thing ever. But when you look at, like what you said before, when you look at Amazon, sometimes it says fiction, like on Barnes & Noble, like this book, I'm like, I don't know if it's really fiction. Like, you know what I mean? It's hard. Mm-hmm. But as you're a nonfiction writer, weaving together all these true crimes and kind of at the end when you try to put things together, like there's just so many things in writing styles that you have to weave together, which would make my head explode as a person. So was there a lot of Post-it notes? What is your writing style? Like, what was your writing during this? Like, what did it look like in your office?
Yeah, so crazy notes. There were notebooks and notes and then digital files and all this stuff. And I worked on it for years and it wasn't really coming together as a book because it's hard to figure out how to tell the Borden story because there is so much detail. And I was trying to find the right balance of the detail. So, it says in the historical notes at the end that there were more than 50 people in and around the Borden house on the day of the murders. How much of that do I include? Do we really need to know about this neighbor who just happened to go into the Borden house because the police never locked down the crime scenes? Because why would you do that? And so how do I do that? And it took a really long time. And even when I published the book, because it's self-published, I didn't know if it worked because many people had read it for me, but I thought, my sister's going to lie to me and tell me the book is good, right? And my friends might buy book. Yeah. So I didn't know if it actually worked. And also speaking of the genres, if you look at the Kindle book on Amazon, they put it, I can pick 3 categories and then they put it in a category. They put it in, I think it's in true crime, mysteries, thriller and suspense, but then they put it in thriller and suspense, which I don't think it is. I think it's a mystery. It's not thriller and suspense. And so I feel like they've kind of miscategorized it in the way that they use their AI, or I don't know how they come up with that category, but I didn't pick it and I would prefer it be in mystery. But back to what you were asking, it took a lot of years and, figuring out how to take all of this thousands and thousands of pages of information and make it a coherent story that's not going to bury you in details, but still has the richness of the history for the Borden story. It was a tremendous amount of confusing work.
You sound like a writer, which I feel like for your job too, you're a writer for this, but do you write multiple books at once? I can barely read multiple books at once because you said it took a couple of years. What are you doing in between?
Yeah, it took actually total, and if you count the research, this book took 10 years, more than 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I should have been working on something else, like something very different, like a romance or science fiction or something, just to, like you say, cleanse my mental palate. But I didn't. I just got so engrossed in the Borden story that it was so interesting, and I couldn't put it down. All the sources, and I would think, I'd wake up in the morning and think, oh, there's that one detail about that thing that happened with that clue. I'm going to put that in my book now, and I'm going to put this here. Oh, I got to make sure and get that in there. And so it just kind of built like that. Basically, the way I wrote it is I started with the facts that we have, and I tried to put them in place in the structure for the book. And then I took stuff out because it was really bloated, and then I added more details. And then it sat for a long time as a mostly complete book, but I would read it over and over again and say, oh, I didn't get that one thing that Uncle John did. Weird Uncle John. I got to get that in there. So yeah.
That's the spoiler. If you know kind of thing, Uncle John, he was just there. What, Uncle John, what are you doing? Literally.
He's such a strange guy. I mean, he says strange things. He does strange things. Some of his actions and words are kind of inexplicable.
It sounded like you kind of just added him for like, a plot point real quick, but he was actually a real person.
Yes. And I think people reading the book who know that there's some fiction in the book might think that the most shocking or surprising things are things I added, a Perry Mason moment in the trial or something like that. No, the shocking things are the things that are true. And then the things that are fiction, I filled in some boring conversations that we're missing from we don't have transcripts, but we know the conversation happened and we know that kind of thing. But the truly shocking, bizarre, wacky stuff in the Borden story that's in the book, that's the true stuff.
I always say this too, that should make it to a t-shirt because that was the best quote I think I've heard it's only February 2nd, but all year.
Oh, yay.
Okay, so I asked my wonderful mother, hi mom, her name's Amy. She's not listening, it's just you and me right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, if you say hello again to her.
Hi, Amy.
That is her Christmas gift for this year.
Oh.
Okay, so I asked her, I was like, Mom, I know you don't really like, you're not a big reader, but you love this book. I said, give me a question that I can ask C for my podcast. And she tried so hard. So she sent me back a Google screenshot that like the Google search engine said, how many Lizzie Borden movies and books are there? I'm like, Mom, what's your question? She put something about like, there's a couple of them out, like there's 8 or something like that. That one didn't make sense. I tried to like unscramble it.
Mm-hmm.
But she said like, why would you do it now if there's so many out there, I think? But we kind of answered that because Lizzie's fun in a bad way.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And also I didn't feel that this book existed. I knew by the time I started writing the book that there was no book like this out there because there are fictional tellings and there's movies. And, when you make a made for TV movie, you have some restrictions. You have to trim it to make it work. And, so I understand why people changed it, but I wanted the most accurate telling possible out there, in a fiction form.
Correct. She actually did ask like a really good question after this one. I was like, Mom, you killed this one. Oh my God, no pun intended. That was terrible.
Lots of murder jokes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh my God, explicit. Okay, so she said, was there anything about this story that surprised you when you were doing your own in-depth research, or did you know most of it by the time you wrote the book?
Yes. So there's so many things that surprised me in the story, but I basically did all the research before I wrote the book. But when you're researching the story, it comes up in the book, and it's not really a spoiler for the mystery, but the fact that this is not the only double murder in the Borden family history, and the other double murder didn't just happen also in New England, also in Massachusetts, also in Fall River. It literally happened in the house right next door. That's wacky, and yet it's only kind of tangential to the Borden murders.
I agree too. It's on your website. You have a blog post about it. I don't think that's well known.
No, and it's just bizarre. And there's all sorts of things like that related to the Borden story. Oh, another thing I learned that was really surprising researching the book is that there's lots of newspaper accounts. Well, you can't trust what was in the newspapers at the time. I had this bias that it's smaller town. People are going to know if they made stuff up, but no, they truly just made stuff up to sell newspapers, to hit deadlines. They would just kind of complete things. And so you can't really use the newspaper accounts as sources if you're trying to write a factually based record of a story. And so that was really interesting. And I thought it was a fun aspect of the Times, the way that they handled news. So we've got the people in town who are all gossiping and running house to house and gossiping. And the reporters were kind of doing the same thing.
That's what I liked about it too, because you had the newspaper clippings, obviously from today's time and everything we know. I can't think of an example, but it's like Lizzie did it, and then she, saw a swamp monster or whatever, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, she what?" But it's
not even true. Yeah, why do you
exactly? But it was for a deadline, you know what I mean? But back then, it was like everything was so hyped and so strung tight that I feel like it was more believable in the time period.
Yeah, and what's going to happen to you if you sell a whole bunch of newspapers based on something that was wrong? Well, you go, oh, well, now it's known that wasn't true. Oh, a tiny little correction in there, but you sold so many newspapers and there was so much competition. I can't remember now exactly how many newspapers there were in Fall River, but by today's standards, there were a ton of newspapers in Fall River. So maybe 4 or 5, I can't remember.
It went global too. Like this, I mean, obviously I wasn't something where I'm like looking into this every day, but yeah, it is a worldwide phenomenon, Lizzie Borden.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. People who are in other countries will say to me, "Oh, I heard of Lizzie Borden." And I go, "Really? Okay, cool. Neat."
I went to a book event, I'm thinking like 2 weeks ago, and someone was like talking, it was like a romance book event, and I was like talking about what we're reading recently. I was like, let me tell you about this book. I said, do you know Lizzie Borden? And they're like, yes. And all these romance readers were like, yes, we don't, I keep saying love. We like the story of Lizzie Borden because it's interesting. And they're like, oh my gosh. So I have given out your book like via recommendation, I think once a week for like 2 months.
Thank you. Thank you. It matters so much because I've never published a book before. I didn't know what I was doing. I basically just said I built the book and I got a cover design and stuff and I did all the prep work. You get your ISBNs and all that. And then you publish it, and you ask your friends and family if they liked it to please tell people and post a review if you can. And you hope it gains some momentum. And, it has actually. So thanks very much.
It's the topic. I think it's your writing and it's the topic and you did a whole book on it and it should be blowing up. I mean, I'm biased, but...
Well, thanks. It's been so much fun. The research was fun. Writing the book was fun. Getting feedback was fun. And now it's out there in the world. It just blows my mind that this thing I wrote in my living room after pouring, I'd sit on the floor in the living room and all these books are in front of me, open with all these sources. And I'm trying to reconcile what time did Uncle John get home? Because this is this and that, trying to make it all make sense. And now it's a book out in the world that people can read and some people like it. And that's amazing.
I really want to know. Okay, so this is probably something you're also expecting too. I sighed really big. So the number one topic for those who know Lizzie Borden case and all that stuff, and it says on your website too in big bold letters, is did Lizzie Borden really murder her parents?
Yeah.
That is like, that's not your tagline, but that's the book's tagline because it's like in bold letters. So for me, I grew up thinking Lizzie did it because I thought it was just like a whole society thing. Like, oh yeah, Lizzie Borden killed her parents, all that kind of thing. I didn't look into it, which is known for me. It's something we all believed in the Midwest, I guess. I don't know. So putting all your knowledge and possible counter opinions aside, how many people have you come across or even met that think Lizzie was not guilty? And do you think she was guilty or not guilty?
Okay, so I worked on the book for so many years and people would ask, oh, what are your hobbies? So I met quite a few people who I told, I'm working on a book about the Borden story and Lizzie Borden. And about half of the people would say, oh, I know that story. And about half the people would say, what? Mm-hmm. And then of the people who knew the story, I'm just guessing, but I think it was about 70% would say, I know all about it. I think it was Lizzie. But then often people would say other things like, and she was this teenager, which she was not a teenager. They would say, and she got hung for the murders, So, and then the other 30% of people who knew about the story are sure she didn't do it. That's fascinating. And then as I was researching the book, I was trying to figure out who did it, right? Because that's basically why you do all this research, right? Because you want to know who did it. And I spent all these years researching. And I read all the transcripts and I read the lawyer's notes, the prosecutor's notes, all his correspondence with the attorney general, the coroner's report, all this stuff. And I still didn't know who did it. And I was really frustrated. I felt like, because it's basically a locked room mystery. If you say it was someone outside the house, how'd they get in and out without being seen on this busy street in broad daylight? And if you say it was someone inside the house, how did they do it in this house without a bathroom, without a shower or a tub, and not have a speck of blood on them? Their hair wasn't wet. And they were seen so soon after the second murder. But then COVID happened. COVID stayed home. I was sitting here with nothing to do one day and I was staring at the wall. And I thought, oh, you know what? I think I know how it was done. And then once you figure out how it was done, then that points to who did it. And so that's what I put in the book. I didn't actually plan to put the solution in the book because I didn't know what it was. Once I thought of it, I thought, oh, I think that's it.
There's so many, like when you Google, I think I went on a Reddit page, like last month. Most comments were, what about the no blood? What about the no blood? And I'm like, yeah. That is a huge, people who don't know the Lizzie Borden case too, like there was no blood. on Lizzie or whoever did it. Yeah. What the heck? And like you said, there's no running water. There's no spigot. So you do say more about that in the book too, which everyone needs to read. But that I think is a huge thing when I talk to people who have talked about it. And like, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a forensic scientist. I'm not a writer. Don't ask me that. But I believe it was Lizzie and then other people involved. But she didn't act alone. Her sister. Yeah. Yeah. I was like, are we allowed to spoil this? I mean, it's a true story, but.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, and Lizzie and her sister are great suspects because they got rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have other suspects. And then as you say, with other people involved, you can make the case for, okay, well, these two got rich, Lizzie and Emma, but then their uncle he was a horse trader. He knew some rough and tumble types. So if you're going to hire someone to commit murders, it could be the uncle, and the maid was there and all, and then you end up with these combinations of trying to say, well, if we're saying it was someone known to us who was in the household, then, which combination could it be? And how did they get it done? Because one of the problems with solving the Borden murders is if you think someone planned it in advance, their plot to get away with it the way they did would have had to, in most explanations, has to depend on a whole lot of luck. But you can't plan luck, right? So how did people get lucky? Or did they just figure out how to do it in a way that didn't require them to get lucky in order to kill the Borden parents? So yeah, it's a fascinating mystery. And it's fascinating too, in the historical record, to see like the prosecutor grappling with, he doesn't think he can prove she did it, right? But he's taking it to court. But how does he prove she did it? He thinks she did it. How does he prove she did it? So yeah, he was there too. He's like, I can't explain how she did it. I think she did it, but I can't explain it.
I want to get heated real quick about the courtroom.
Which was hot. It was literally hot in there because it was summer and they had no air conditioning. They were baking in there.
I'd be mad. I'd be sweating. I'd be hot. I would not be a good state if I was there. I don't even have this in my questions, but I have to talk about how I think it was at the end of, I'm so bad at legal talk, when they were saying like the defense case or whatever, and the judges were like talking people out of her being guilty. You know what I'm talking about? What was that?
Yeah, that there's a lot of problems with the trial. And it actually brings in, so Killing the Bordens is not a feminist book. It's not about feminism. It's not about women's issues at the time. But there's no way to tell the Borden story without feminism and women's issues and gender bias. And this idea runs throughout the whole story that some people thought Lizzie Borden seems very calm when she's in court. And half of the people seem to think it's because she's a murderer. She's Satan's child. And then half the people thought it's because she's an innocent woman and she has confidence in this court process. She knows she's going to be acquitted because she knows she didn't do it. And you can see kind of aspects of the gender biases in those two perspectives. And you could see the gender biases in the courtroom, the way the lawyers made their cases. And the lawyers in the Borden case were so good. I wish we had video. I would love to see video of Governor Robinson on Lizzie's legal team making the case because he was so charming. And you can
he's swaying jurors too. But then, then it happens. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And all we have to work from really are the court transcripts of word for word what he said, but we don't know the intonation. When's he pausing, all this stuff? And then we have newspaper accounts of what he was like and that kind of stuff. He was so, so good. But we have all these ways, like her lawyers talked about her as a girl. They called her a girl, even though she was 32, almost 33 at the time of the trial. And then the prosecutors called her a woman. And so it was just so commonplace to have these kinds of biases that, sure, a 32-year-old woman can be a girl because she's never been married. She's ostensibly a virgin. Therefore, she's immature. She's a girl. But the prosecution made sure to call her a woman so they could see her as potentially being someone who could commit murder. But yeah, the judges were just grandfatherly, I guess. They seemed like I think they were all in their 60s. And what did they really think of Lizzie Borden? It's possible they saw a girl, a naive, helpless girl.
That's what I felt like it kept saying that too. And the whole time I was like, she's more than just, oh, poor little Lizzie, you know what I mean? It happened really bad in her house. I'm like, there's just more. And like, what was the one? Oh, I'm sorry. Again, I'm getting heated.
Mm-hmm.
It was the axe head. This is going to be graphic, in the skull of Mr. Borden.
Yeah.
It fit, correct? Is that the one?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that was something I don't remember ever reading about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And they call that the handleless hatchet. Yeah. So imagine in the era, just like now, when you buy an axe or a hatchet or something at the store, it's all exactly the same size because they were all made in the factory. But then you use it over time, you sharpen it over time, and they all develop this unique signature. Yeah. And that moment in court where they show that the hatchet head that they found on the property exactly fits the wounds. Oh, the marks, the grooves. Yes. Gruesome. But inside Mr. Borden's head. Yeah.
That one is like I talked to my parents before dinner happened because I was like, it's going to be gross, but I have to tell you about this part in the book.
Oh, yeah. That's creepy.
So I think for me as a reader, what sets this book apart from other books, I haven't read other books, but I did do research in community college in like 2011 maybe. I had a speech class and I had to defend or tell Lizzie Borden. I do a speech on it. I did say that Lizzie Borden was guilty. I don't remember any part of my speech. I'm just a good speaker, so I got an A. I don't even know if she liked my speech or not, my teacher. But I remember, yeah, thank you so much. How many darn years ago? But I was like, I passed. I don't care. I'm a yapper. So I remember going to like my college library and like looking up just like, I don't know if there were transcripts, but just like professional things. There weren't like books. Mm-hmm. And I don't think as a reader back then, I had a great time with it because that's not how I read. That's not how I processed and had fun with, but it's also school. So, but this book, I have to talk about the big difference for me too, is the ending and how the step-by-step in the murders happened in your eyes. And so, I don't know. I think that was the best part of the book. I love the book in general, but the ending, when I was not expecting you to be like, hey, this could have been what happened, or this, this is what makes sense for me. This question's a little bit deeper about the ending part. Was there any part of your scene setting in that ending where you had to go back a few times and say, this doesn't fit? Like you said earlier, you can't figure it out completely. But when you were done, were you 100% solid, or are you still kind of questioning it?
Yeah. So like I say, I really had no idea for the longest time. And even I thought, ridiculous things like somebody, I think it was one of the lawyers of the defense team said, well, we know Mr. Borden didn't kill Mrs. Borden and then kill himself, and then hide the weapon after he was dead. But you kind of, at some point, you start thinking about those things. Did Mr. Borden kill Mrs. Borden? Did they kill each other with axes? Is that what it is? But then, so I truly had no idea, and I kept trying to figure it out and what combination, and nothing really made sense. I couldn't make the facts fit. But then when this one thing came into my head, I did that morning. I remember it was a Saturday morning. And I called my sister and I said, hey, what would you think? And she's my sounding board on this. I said, what would you think if I said the solution to the Borden murders is this? And then this happened, this happened, this happened. And that explains this clue and explains that clue and that clue. It explains all the clues. And she thought of it a little bit and she said, yeah, I think that makes sense. And she said, did you just solve this? And I said, no. I said, I'll call you back in a few days and I'll tell you what's wrong with this solution, why this can't be it, when I figure it out. And I never did. That was years ago because that was in COVID. And basically that solution that came into my head, I think that is it. I personally believe that's the solution to the murders. And the only things that were tricky in writing that explanation in the book is getting the details of the timing right. Because certain things happened in a certain order and they had to have happened in that order. But that was it, really. Sometimes I was writing and I think, oh, wait, where's the axe right now? Where's the weapon right now? Because there was this break between the two killers. So what happened to the weapon in the meantime? And stuff like that, because no one found any blood drips in the closets. And, how do you explain? Like you mentioned the blood spatter before. Not only is there not blood spatter on anybody who's a suspect, even though they're good suspects, I mean, they got rich. There's also no blood spatter anywhere except the two crime scenes because they were killed in different rooms. Why is there not blood drips between? Why is there not blood drips between the sitting room and the sink room, which is kind of at the edge of the house here where there was a sink, why is there no blood drips? How was someone able, whoever they were, to commit axe murders and there's not any blood anywhere?
I've read the book and I'm still like, oh my God, it blows my mind. The way you said too in the book, I'm not going to give it away, how Lizzie, helped murder her father. If you believe that, it is true. Mm-hmm. The way she did it, like with the clothing and everything, that is, your mind works in mysterious ways, but really, really, really smart. Because I would have never thought for any of that. That was so good.
Well, thank you. I'm just a curious person. And so that when things come up, you wonder about it. And I guess my brain's always churning. But there's so many aspects of the Borden story that are so fascinating that I still don't have the answer to. And this has totally nothing to do with the murders, but in the courtroom, the prosecution took pains to question people what was happening in the Borden house on the day of the murders, the morning of the murders. They wanted to establish where everyone in the household, the 5 people who slept in the house the night before the murders, where they were every day or in that morning. And one thing that still kind of bothers me about the research that I never could answer is, according to that testimony, that they were very careful, only one person in that household got up in the morning and went to the bathroom. Uncle John spent the night and then he went to the bathroom. According to the sworn statements from the witnesses in the house, nobody went to the bathroom. And it has nothing to do with the murders or anything, but it's still bothering me. See? So I can't let it go. But those kinds of details in the story, if you latch onto it and you think, okay, why was there no blood anywhere else? Well, what could explain that? What could explain that fits the clues that we have? And this thing was in the wrong place after the murders. Oh, maybe that thing has to do with there being no blood spatter anywhere else in the rest of the house because it was in the wrong place. That thing was wrong. Yeah.
I need to know, have you visited the house? Biggest question.
No.
I haven't.
I know.
It's a bed and breakfast now.
It is. I've seen it on YouTube, but I haven't actually visited the house, and it's a terrible oversight on my part, but there's some personal life reasons why I haven't made it there. But it's beautiful, and I love that it's restored, back to what it was in the 1800s. And I also love that you can go in and see the things that are in the Borden story, like the sitting room. And what a peculiar room that is. It's
yes. Okay, so it's your book that shows. I had the Kindle version. You had the map. Did you have the map?
The diagrams, yeah, the
diagrams.
Yeah.
Yes, because it was, and it kind of made the story more bizarre because there's like one entrance and one not, and the food that they left out for days, and I'm like, that had no point to the story. That just wowed me. But no, the maps really put things in perspective. Like, this is a weirdly built house.
It is a very strange house. And the sitting room where Mr. Borden was killed, I think it's 12 by 14, something like that, 14 feet. And it actually has 5 doors. So there's a door from the kitchen, the dining room, the front parlor, the front entry, and then there's a closet. And so this little room has all these doors. And it has a very strange layout too. And actually that brings up something I changed in the book that I made factually incorrect, and it still bothers me, but it's a super minor detail. But when Dr. Bowen, they realize something bad has happened to Mr. Borden, right? The alarm is raised and they call Dr. Bowen, who lives across the street, but he's also the family doctor, to come, and they pull him into the house and they're like, you go into the sitting room and see, is he sick? Is he dead? Is he stabbed? We don't know what happened. He doesn't go actually in real life from the kitchen straight into the sitting room. He actually, according to his testimony, went the long way around. He went to the dining room and then he went into the sitting room, which is a weird thing to do because there's a door directly from the kitchen to the sitting room. It's not explained in the historical record, and it's kind of a confusing thing, which is why I changed it in my book, which is one of the few things I know it's factually different, but I changed it for the book. And I think the reason he did it is because he was familiar with the Borden house. He knew them well. He had been in the sitting room just the day before talking to Mr. Borden. And he knew if you walk straight in from the kitchen to the sitting room and you keep walking straight, you're going to walk right into the armrest for the sofa. And yet that is what the Borden house was set up like. They literally had a sofa because that's the only, where you would walk right into it if you came in from the kitchen, because that's the only place that you could put a sofa in that room. The south wall had windows, so it didn't have any doors, but the windows were lower than the back of the sofa.
It reminds me of that Chicago H.H. Holmes, like the murder house kind of thing, where there's like different. Do you remember that one where he built like a whole like house with like doors that led to nowhere? And The Devil in the White City. What was his?
Oh,
yeah. H.H. Holmes guy. Yeah, that was weirdly built, but that was for a purpose. This one just seems like they kind of gave up on the house architecture.
Yes, and I think that's it. There was something neglectful about the Bordens in general. They were just sort of neglectful about each other. They were neglectful about life. They were neglectful about their house. And you see that too when the police come into the house and they find these bodies, and now they're going to investigate. They're going to find out who done it. And they're searching the house possibly for the weapon, because the weapon is not anywhere near the bodies. Okay. And they go down in the cellar, and the cellar has all these boxes of neglected and rusty old abandoned tools. And it's just a weird house that Mr. Borden was so rich. He was literally the president of a bank. And yet they live in this house that's so neglectful and odd. And just like the rooms don't match, and you can't really use the house you can't use it for entertaining like people of their social class did. And you could have a couple people over, but
No.
And so, yeah, the house itself is almost a symbol of the Borden family and how they were just oddly unconnected people. The house lacked love, Yeah, that's what it was, I think.
The neglected part really made sense, because when I brought up earlier too, real quick, about the food, they left food out, like meat and stuff too, and they're like, yeah, let's just have dinner of this old rotten food we had. What was the food they had the night they had food poisoning ish?
Yeah, well, they had cooked swordfish, and then they left it on the out.
It was swordfish then. Okay, yeah.
And later they had. Yeah, but then later they had mutton stew. They also left out all day,
That's what it was.
Without eating it. And I think I remember a quote from Uncle John, who had eaten that food, and he said he couldn't identify the food. He was eating at the Borden house. And so luckily they had berries in the backyard, and they had bananas. Yeah. The food is gross. It's a miracle they live long enough to be murdered. Yeah. It's amazing, because Mr. Borden was so cheap, He just didn't even.
That was when you said about the pear tree in the backyard. I just think of Uncle John eating that pear tree. He sees everyone is literally like placed all around the Borden house, and people are like, wow, something's going on. He just walks right in eating a pear. Like, sir, someone's murdered.
Right. And he never changed his testimony, his story, that he had walked past that crowd of dozens of people on the street who've heard about something or murders or something. He walks past, he swore he never saw anybody. He walks past the police. He walks past the neighbor who's stationed at the Borden side door, and he gets a pear, which is also, it's a weird thing to do in general, because we know he had breakfast at the Borden house, but now we know how bad the food was. So maybe he was hungry, but he has breakfast at the Borden house. Then he goes to have brunch with a relative. They didn't use that term brunch at the time, but that's what he did. And then he's coming back to the Borden house to have lunch, and he's eating again. He's having a pear, but he probably was anticipating eating that same mutton stew. So he goes to the backyard and he gets a pear.
Do you think he has a tapeworm from all that terrible food? And now he just can't stop eating because the tapeworm needs to be fed?
Maybe is a tapeworm. And there's something else in the story that I think is true as well. I think you can make the case that the Morse family line, so this is Lizzie and Emma's birth mother, Sarah Morse Borden, and Uncle John is her brother. I think you can make the case that there's something in their family line which they didn't have terms for at the time, but in today's world, we probably call it like autism or neurodivergence or something, that they just thought differently in that family line, and they were a little different. And you see that a lot in Uncle John. He doesn't know how to answer the police questions. He doesn't know how to give straight answers. But you could say, well, he's upset. Or you could say he's a weird guy. I don't know. He was
all the above.
Yes, all of the above.
Okay, so I need to know what's next for you. Do you have any books coming up, any work in progress that you can legally share about? Tell me everything and anything you can.
Yes. So there's a second book. It is not about the Borden story, but it is, I told everything I could think of in this first book, in Killing the Bordens. Everything's in there. If it didn't make it into the book proper, it's in the historical notes. But the second book is also based on a historical true crime mystery that happened in the United States about 100 years ago. It's not as famous as the Borden story. And also, there's a lot less known about it. I mean, the blessing and the curse of the Borden story is that all this work was done. All these people preserved all this information, the transcript, they typed them up, they made them available online. Thank you, Stephanie and C.Cree and Harry Widows for doing that work, for transcribing that stuff. But the second story I've picked, there's maybe a couple books, like 3 books or something. And so a lot more of it needs to be fiction. And so I've turned it into a ghost story. It's about a famous killer some people have heard of, but it's a ghost story and some of the characters are dead.
Is that still a work in progress, or are we doing like? Okay, is there like
Plot
a year?
Almost done. Yeah, I'm hoping to have it published by Halloween because ghost story, that would be fun. But there's a lot of steps. It takes time to get all the steps done, especially with feedback. I want people to tell me what's not working in the book before I publish it, not after. And so I'm hoping to have it done this year.
My heart is beating, like, in a really good way, though. Like, I'm really excited.
Thank you. Oh, I'm loving it because with the Borden story, I told my sister when I was writing Killing the Bordens, I said, the next book I write will not require me to look something up for almost every sentence. This is driving me crazy, right? It's taken forever. That's why it took so many years to write the book. But the second book, I've already read all the information that's available. So I'm now making stuff up and it's fun and it's interesting. And I got so many good surprises, I think plot twists, things you didn't think were happening, but still consistent with the historical facts.
That's exactly what I loved about the Borden book. It's literally like, even though you said there's a lot more research in the Borden book, but it's the way the narrative is written. You do it so, again, Megan, I gotta stop gushing about you. My goodness. See, I'm so sorry that I keep telling you how great you are.
That's very sweet. Thank you. And I when I was writing it, I wasn't trying to write a thriller, but I was trying to write it as if the reader is a person in Fall River to make the experience of reading the book, the experience of being someone. Maybe you live down the street from the Bordens. Maybe you sort of know who they are. You've seen them around, but you don't really know anything about them. And then have the story play out the way it did for people who actually lived there at the time.
C.Cree, thank you for coming on Megan's Bookish Life podcast. I don't think I will top this interview for the next 5 years. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much, Megan. It's so much fun. I love talking about the Borden story. These are great questions. This has been so much fun for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Megan's Bookish Life. Don't forget to leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And follow me at Megan's Bookish Life Podcast on Instagram.